Liz Cheney and Cassidy Hutchinson, Clavicle girl, they plotted, they lied, they stood there in front of America during their fake show trials in their illegally constituted J6 committee and swore an oath that they were going to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help them, whatever their God is. And then they lied to us. Remember, Cassidy, aka Clavicle girl, said that Donald Trump reached over to a Secret Service agent, grabbed him by the clavicle, said, "Take me back to the Capitol. I'm in charge here," okay? And told us this whole sob story, after which Liz Cheney confirmed it and played patty cake with her on the national stage. We got that clip coming up, but it's not true. Didn't happen. She's going to tell us that this whole thing came from a guy called Tony Ornato. And Ornato, we're going to find out, never conveyed that story to her at all. And that story came out in this report by Congress from the weaponization and the subcommittee that's investigating the J6 committee. It's called Failures of the J6 Committee Report. It's an 81-pager. We're going to dive into it because there are nuggets in there that say Ornato says it is all fabricated. But you remember what it sounded like when Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson and Raskin and the rest of them were up there lying to us with their fake show trial. And remember, HR 503 told us that this was supposed to be constituted with 5 Republicans appointed by the minority. Never happened, as we're going to talk about. So the whole thing was fake. There was no adversarial process here. There was no cross-examination. There was no counter-presentation at all. It was just a big book report from Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson meant to be a legislative run around the courts. You have to convene a grand jury and go get evidence. That's a whole different process. You got to have a lot to that, right? This was different. This was Congress now, just using their legislative powers to go gobble all this evidence up like a Hoover vacuum and then bundle it up and dish it out to Jack Smith, dish it out to Fannie, give it over to whoever wants it and wants to bring a claim. That's why it existed. But this is the lie that we remember from Clavicle Girl in Congress.
When you returned to the White House in the motorcade after the president's speech, where did you go?
When I returned to the White House, I walked upstairs towards the Chief of Staff's office, and I noticed Mr. Ornato lingering outside of the office. Once we had made eye contact, he quickly waved me to go into his office, which was just across the hall from mine. When I went in, he shut the door, and I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost. I looked at Tony, and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" I said, "No, Tony, I just got back." "What happened?" Tony proceeded to tell me that when the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, "We're not, we don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing," the president had very strong, very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
His clavicles.
And was Mr. Engel in the room as Mr. Ornato told you this story?
He was.
Did Mr. Engel correct or disagree?
Okay, no, Mr. Engel didn't correct or disagree. Engel's there. Tony Ornato's there. Trump literally is lunging through the vehicle, grabbing the wheel, pulling, "Get out of here." It's like, a scene out of a Hollywood film. Then he is being fought back like 4 Secret Service agents. You know how Trump is like a monster, like the Hulk. Roar! He grabs him by the clavicle, almost rips the guy's shoulder off, and then they finally get him off, and they drag him back to the White House. Problem with that, it's not true. None of it's true. They should have brought out a doll. Say, "Can you show me, Cassidy, on the doll where Tony said that Trump touched the Secret Service agent, please?" The whole thing is ridiculous, right? Okay, so we knew it was ridiculous. Now, this is like a political Rorschach test. There's a huge swath of this country, for whatever reason, was watching this and going, "Oh my gosh, it's Trump, he's a dictator." And they're still in PTSD. I feel bad for some of them. I mean, I know some people like that who, are nice people and they just purely brainwashed by our government. They don't know any better. But it's fictions like this that did that programming, right? Problem is they're not true. They're lies. On the other side of this political inkblot test, right, it's obviously ridiculous. We're all sitting here. We were watching this. We're going, what are we watching? Is this like a sitcom? This is insane. Obviously, nobody thinks that that is even remotely feasible, that that ever happened at all. But thesd people are so TDS'd up and deluded that they accept it as truth. Now, let's talk about why it's fictional This is the report. Loudermilk put this out. Here's what it says. It is from the Subcommittee on Oversight, House Administration, and it is the initial findings report. It's on the failures and the politicization of the J6 Select Committee and the cover-up that they were conducting when they were investigating J6. Before we jump into this section, Cassidy Hutchinson, the star witness, let's lay a little bit of foundation here. So they tell us, backing up just a smidge, that in November of 2022, so November, we rewind the clock, the White House is sending letters, right? They sent some letters about Secret Service. So White House, Biden's in charge, sends a letter to Homeland stating that Biden was waiving executive privilege to allow the Secret Service to testify in front of Liz Cheney, right? In front of this fake committee. So Biden says, you know, we're going to go ahead. We'll waive privilege for these agents. That way they can go and have this conversation, testify about whatever. So these letters identify the employees by name and they include the date of their interview. Now, the Secret Service employees, they were physically with and around President Trump on J6, and their firsthand testimony is directly relevant to the narrative that was presented by Liz. However, these transcripts were not archived or published by the Select Committee. Weird. So Secret Service are driving Trump. Okay, everybody in the van, Secret Service, Engel, right, all these people. Letters identify them by name. Biden says, hey, we're going to waive your privilege. Go testify. So then they go, they meet with them. They actually have conversations, but nothing's archived. Now, one of the transcribed interviews that Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson did not properly archive out of all of them and has never been publicly released is the interview of Anthony Ornato, Tony Ornato. Isn't that interesting? Same guy that Cassidy was just talking about. The same guy that told her the story from Engel, who said that Trump was, ripping clavicles out of throats. White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. No archive. The Select Committee conducted 3 transcribed interviews with Ornato. We got the dates on those, January 28th, March 29th, November 29th. And the Select Committee saved a copy of his January 28th transcribed interview in a folder associated with exhibits from Ornato's public November 29th interview. And then Ornato's January 28th transcribed interview with the Select Committee was not archived in the transcribed interviews folder with the other witness transcript, which included Ornato's November 29th transcript. So it's not clear if the Select Committee intended to turn over this transcript to the subcommittee. So we got some weirdness going on with the files. They saved a copy of his interview from January 28th in a folder that was associated with November 29, right? So this was, so they mixing folders. Then the transcribed interview with the Select Committee was not archived. It sounds like they're moving files around, maybe even deleting files. Right? I don't know really what's going on, but it's not there. They're missing key transcripts from his obviously conducted interviews. Now, Ornato was a key figure in Cassidy Hutchinson's version of events in Trump's SUV. Clearly, any transcribed interview that Ornato did with the Select Committee prior to Hutchinson's June 2022 interview are important factors to consider in weighing Hutchinson's credibility. We're asking, who came first? What's the timeline? So we've got now June, so January, March, then we get Clavicle Girl gets the interview, then we're back to Tony Ornato. So it's, Tony, Clavicle Girl, Tony. And similarly, Ornato's testimony in any interviews with the Select Committee reflect on the accuracy of their choice to promote Clavicle Girl's version of the events following Trump's speech at the Ellipse. Now, while it's unknown if Liz Cheney and the others meant to hide the January 28th interview, we don't know if they intended to, but the Select Committee did not make the interview publicly available. And the Select Committee's failure to disclose this transcript is additional evidence that the Select Committee only released evidence that fit their narrative, right? So they're just skimming off the top, deleting what they, want to delete that we'll talk about. Now, here is where we get to Cassidy. Cassidy Hutchinson, aka Clavicle Girl. They say, all right, America, Cassidy Hutchinson, she participated in a total of 6 transcribed interviews and 1 primetime hearing that we all heard from her with the Select Committee. So hanging out with Liz Cheney 6 times. 4 of Hutchinson's transcribed interviews were held prior to her June 28th Select Committee public hearing, and 2 additional interviews were completed after her public testimony. Now, Hutchinson's testimony in her 4th interview and her public testimony are directly contradicted by White House employees and Secret Service agents and their transcribed interviews, which were never released publicly. So Cassidy met a bunch of times, and there's her version of the events, and there's a contradictory version, which is why it's nice to have adversarial proceedings where you get 2 sides of the story. If you only get one side, then you get liars, people who just make up stuff because they want to be, part of the new anti-Trump TDS Spice Girls, which she is now a part of, touring the world all over the media with the other 2. So here, they don't release this other perspective from the employees and the Secret Service, who might be be a lot more credible? The Select Committee conducted its 4th transcribed interview with Clavicle Girl on June 20th, 2022, number 4, 8 days before Hutchinson would ultimately testify publicly. Cramming her in there. Let's get your story straight. In Hutchinson's 4th transcribed interview, she tells a brand new version of events and explicitly contradicts many of the statements that she made under oath in her initial 3 transcribed interviews. So they say, let's try again. 1, 2, 3, 4th time's the charm. In her 4th interview then, that was transcribed, Hutchinson recounted a sensational news story, just pulled it out of her fanny, about what happened in the presidential limo after Trump's speech at the Ellipse. We heard her story there. Now, Hutchinson claimed that when she returned to the White House after the speech, she saw Tony Ornato, keep our names straight, who was then President Trump's deputy chief of staff. And she also saw, who was also a former U.S. Secret Service agent, lingering in the hallway of the West Wing. Hutchinson testified that Ornato waved her into his office. Hey, Clavicle Girl, get in here. And then shared a story about President Trump that agent Bobby Engel, the head of Trump's Secret Service detail, supposedly told him just before. Okay, so now it's like layers of hearsay. So Cassidy didn't see it happen. Tony didn't see it happen, but Tony heard from Bobby, who did see it happen. So it's like the game of telephone. You know, it's like, hey, you know, you play the kids in the circle, whatever, play the game. Somebody says something, by the end, you know, comes around. You're like, what the heck came out of your mouth, son? You're grounded. So same thing happened here, or, you know, could have happened here. Like the evidence is like 3 steps removed. Bobby saw it, then told a story to Tony. Then Tony interpreted that, allegedly told a story to Clavicle Girl. And then she told it to Cheney, but forgot about it until the 4th time. Didn't remember that, you know, until like 4th time. Like, are you sure there were no clavicles grabbed? And she's like, you know, now that you mentioned the word clavicle, yeah. So Ornato was not at the Ellipse that day, but instead he remained at the White House during Trump's speech. So this new story is the version of events that the Select Committee rushed Hutchinson to share at the Select Committee's highly publicized, quote, emergency hearing, remember? And all the media was just really indulging themselves, which is disgusting to watch on national TV of all places, about this. Liz Cheney, oh my gosh. But the truth is different. Now, in Ornato's, when Ornato spoke with the committee, okay, Tony Ornato, the same person who's the crux of this, allegedly told Clavicle Girl this story, he had an interview as well. It was also transcribed. And guess what he said? He directly refuted Hutchinson's testimony. Huh, how about that? That she allegedly heard the story about what happened in the Beast. Literally directly refutes her. Ornato testified that the first time he had ever heard the story that Hutchinson claims Ornato told her on J6 was during Hutchinson's public testimony. He's like, what? I told her what story? Huh? Okay. What else did I tell her? That Trump was going to escape on a rope helicopter ladder and Melania was going to be there with a machete and a bazooka and a cigar from Cuba as they're, you know, leaving the Beast and flying off to where? It's ridiculous. Like the whole thing's ridiculous. So it's clearly not true, right? Tony didn't tell her anything. Here is the testimony, and this is what a liar Liz Cheney is. Liz Cheney is asking this question. Did you speak with the Secret Service spokesman following Miss Hutchinson's testimony? Witness says, I recall that day after Miss Hutchinson's testimony, going to the Secret Service counsel and being in his office, and then the Secret Service spokesperson asking me about what my recollection was of that story. And I relayed that that is not a story I recollect, and I don't recall that story happening. And the first time hearing it is when she had said it. Liz Cheney says, thank you. Crazy. Ornato tells her, I recall that day after Miss Hutchinson's testimony, I went to the Secret Service lawyers, and I remember going to his office, and then the Secret Service spokesman say, well, if that's not true, what do you remember happened? And I said, that is not a story I recollect. I don't remember that at all, and I don't recall that story happening, and the first time hearing it is when she said it. Liz Cheney says, thank you, but your story is interfering with my fictional propaganda narrative. He directly contradicts it, right? And she put the other one on the stand, the one that served her interests. So Hutchinson's testimony was also contradicted by the U.S. Secret Service agent who was actually with President Trump on J6. On November 7, 2022, the Select Committee conducted a transcribed interview with U.S. Secret Service agent who drove President Trump and Engel to and from the Ellipse on J6. The guy who had his clavicle almost ripped from his body by Trump's MAGA hands. So in this interview, guess what? The Select Committee did not ask the driver about Hutchinson's testimony. Weird, isn't it convenient? So the one thing Cassidy's like, wait a minute, Trump tried to murder and grab the wheel of the driver? Get that driver in here right now. Get that driver in here so we can talk to that person, right? Hey man, let me see the bruising on your shoulder. Let me see the injuries, honestly. Like that's an assault. Trump assaulted a Secret Service agent. Okay, you know, maybe he's got some presidential immunity and whatever. But you know, the point is he would have have some evidence of this if this insane, ridiculous story was even remotely true. Fact is, it's not. But they would ask about that, right? Get the photos. Let's bring this guy in. Let's say I was attacked by Trump. It's fake. Hutchinson's accusation, they didn't even ask him about it. Hutchinson's accusation came up only after the Secret Service agent's attorney proactively brought up the subject. So they said the driver testified that he specifically refuted the version of events as recounted by Hutchinson. Amazing. So they didn't ask him. Secret Service agent's lawyer brought it up, said, hey, we probably should clear this up. And he said, hey, by the way, so they were going to just let it not go, right? Don't ask a question you don't want to know the answer to, obviously. They're not going to ask him about that because then he's going to say, no, that never happened. And Cassidy Hutchinson's credibility is going to go in the toilet. So they didn't ask him about it. But the lawyer honestly was trying to be a good lawyer and trying to help his client, saying, hey, like if you're trying to say my client is going to corroborate that BS story from Cassidy, think again, okay? Not true. What do you say happened here, driver? Driver testified that he specifically refuted the version of events that Hutchinson had. Not true. The guy who drove, not Cassidy Hutchinson's third-hand story from the agent to Angle, then to Ornato, then to Cassidy, then to Cheney. Probably one step further removed. The driver of the SUV testified that, quote, he did not see him reach and Trump never grabbed the steering wheel. I didn't see him, lunge to try to get into the front seat at all. At all. Fake liars. So they've got two people now, the actual driver who tells us that there is no evidence of that. Now, despite the driver of the president's SUV testifying under oath that the Hutchinson story was false, the committee, Liz Cheney, chose to validate and to promote her fake lie and her version of the story as fact. And the fake committee hid the driver's full testimony and only favorably mentioned his testimony in its final report. It did not release the full transcript. Incredible. It's really disgusting that they're even pretending to care about American interests at all, right? It's just pure propaganda through and through. Now, Hutchinson, they said, had a fourth transcribed interview in public testimony. Now, the fourth transcribed interview, so remember Cassidy, as we talked about up here, she met with Liz, I think 6 times total, 4 before she testified and 2 after she testified. The fourth interview was very strange. That's when this whole fake story came up about the Clavicle Attack. Here's how it came about. The fourth transcribed interview was not conducted like most of the other transcribed interviews. Oh no. The fourth interview was conducted deep in the bowels of Cheney's U.S. Capitol hideaway, with only Cheney and one select committee staffer present. Gross. Right in the gutters. Stepping in my office. It smells like war. Now, additionally, according to Hutchinson, when she walked to Representative Cheney's office, Liz embraced her. Hey, sweetheart, you're saving America. We can't wait to get you a book deal. That's footnote 199. Where does that come from? It comes from her book, right? She wrote about it. These people's arrogance is going to be their downfall. She wrote about it in her book. Liz Cheney gave me a big, fat, warm, sloppy hug because she knew what was coming. She was going to bait her into creating this fake story. Now, shortly after Hutchinson completed her fourth transcribed interview, Cheney held a meeting with Benny and other select committee staff, including Pelosi advisor called Jamie Fleet. And Cheney showed the group a video recording of the transcribed interview that just completed with Hutchinson. Cheney comes out and says, perfect. We need something more. No one's buying our fake, stupid story. We need a crescendo. We need some fireworks. How's this for a clavicle attack? Shows it to Raskin and everyone else. Like, oh, perfect. It was apparently Fleet, who works with Pelosi, the Pelosi advisor, who then called the other 7 select committee members and told them there needs to be a hearing next week. But Fleet did not disclose that this hearing would feature Hutchinson and her new testimony. And this comes from Robert Draper's book, Inside the J6 Committee, or an article maybe he posted in New York Times. Now, the other 7 members of the select committee were not told who the witness would be, or even the subject of the hearing until the morning of June 28th. Liz hid it even from them. And that morning, Cheney informed the other members that they had been summoned back because Cassidy Hutchinson, Clavicle Girl, had shared explosive new revelations pertinent to our investigation. And according to Chairman Thompson, Benny, who just sat there like, a log, the other members of the select committee were shown Hutchinson's fourth transcribed interview testimony for the first time in a skiff just hours before the hearing was scheduled to begin. It's wild. These people are mischievous, man. So Cheney was running this whole thing, right? As, were the intelligence agencies, I'm sure. I think, Cheney's just an entity of the intelligence agencies, clearly. And so they're all coordinating this. The rest of the committee members are literally useless, right? Kinzinger, was on there. Just shut up and just cry harder over there. So that's about it, right? Now, during a public hearing then, on June 28th, Hutchinson testified at that fake hearing that Trump, while while in his motorcade after his speech at the Ellipse on J6, attempted to grab the steering wheel from a Secret Service employee driving the vehicle and lunged at another Secret Service agent called Bobby Engel. Now, Hutchinson did make clear that this sensational claim was not based on firsthand knowledge, right? But this version of events was entirely new, had not been corroborated by any other witness to this point, including by Hutchinson's prior testimony the first 3 times that she was interviewed. Now, the Select Committee did not seek interviews with the 2 Secret Service agents in the vehicle with former President Trump to corroborate this story. They didn't try to do that. They just ran to public with it to promote this new story, and it was all over the media, man. You remember this? Despite this, news outlets characterized this testimony as explosive. Oh my gosh. And a damning inside account of Trump's actions. They were like, children. It was wild. Now they continue telling us in Hutchinson's first 3 transcribed interviews that took place February, March, and May, she never mentioned this story about Trump lunging toward the driver in the Beast at all. She claims the reason she did not testify about this sooner was because of her attorney. Her attorney, Stephan, who represented Hutchinson, told her don't. Now, in a letter from Hutchinson's attorney to the subcommittee, they explained that the sensational new testimony in her 4th transcribed interview was a result of his previous attorney. Hutchinson repeatedly claims that Pasatino is the reason she didn't come forward with this sooner. But her own words in her book call into question her claims that Pasatino was the reason her story changed oh so significantly. She wrote this in her book. She asked if I wanted a new lawyer. I told her I needed to do this in a way that wouldn't alert Trump world to what I was up to. Talking about Cheney. This is from her book, so you don't have to buy it. I couldn't fire Stephan without tripping alarms at Mar-a-Lago. You can't make the break, Cassidy, she said with frustration in her voice. I think I'm in too deep, Alyssa. Can we try something else first? And is that Alyssa Farah, the other Spice Girl? It is. Yeah, so there's multiple TDS Spice Girls who are, now assembling with their, intergalactic powers, and they are working against Trump. And so they brought Alyssa into the book, obviously, clearly. You want to cross-pollinate your Spice Girls. I think I'm in too deep, Alyssa. We talked over my options, and Alyssa agreed to contact Liz Cheney on my behalf about scheduling another interview. And I cautioned her that there would likely be aggressive resistance from Stefan. I would probably need a subpoena, or he would reject the request to talk in front of Liz. I had every intention of complying fully, I told her, but without another subpoena, Stefan may encourage me not to cooperate. Alyssa nodded and said, Liz will probably ask for a few things you wanted to talk about before she agrees to do another interview. And I knew she was right, but I couldn't proffer information already covered in my earlier depositions. That would tip Stephan off. So according to her book then, Hutchinson went into her 3rd interview in May of 2022, ready to provide testimony to the questions that she fed to the Select Committee without Pasatino's knowledge. Right now, she's talking through Alyssa. In her book, Hutchinson also explains how she spoke with Alyssa Farah Griffin after her 2nd transcribed interview in order to orchestrate the Select Committee inviting her back for a 3rd interview. You want to come back for an interview, you got to give them something. What's your story? This conversation with Farah occurred on April 26. Now, Hutchinson explains how she did not want to fire her lawyer, but did want to provide additional testimony to Liz. Hutchinson even claims that she provided information to the J6 committee through Alyssa, the other Spice Girl, or another individual to lead the Select Committee to ask her specific questions. Exactly, right? So she was the middle person, right? She says, I can recruit someone else. They're creating their little TDS entourage. Here's more from the book. I essentially had just told her, can you just back channel to the committee and say that there is a few things that I want to talk about, because I was trying to think of things that the committee had not asked me in my first interview where it wouldn't set off alarm bells to Stephan. And if you guys had asked questions about the Beast, what happened in the presidential SUV? So we came back to me, someone would be like, okay, she let them know that she has more on this. Hutchinson explained how she was so nervous because Pasatino had no knowledge of the things that she was about to say in the 3rd interview, just sprung it out of nowhere, that she had to walk out of the room and gather herself. Now, despite Hutchinson arranging for the 3rd interview and planning to provide testimony without Pasatino's knowledge, Hutchinson did not recount the story she supposedly heard from Ornato about Trump grabbing the wheel and lunging at the agent in the presidential limo. Here is more from the interview. Okay, this is all transcripts from the interview. Question to her. I knew what I was going to be asked. I was confident in my responses to those questions. I mostly, in my mind, she says, I was thinking, how is Stephan going to react? Is he going to catch on to this? And I kept in my head hoping, I was like, please don't ask me questions. Don't make it obvious that this came from me, in which it didn't. But I think I walked in and I just had this moment of panic. And I think I sat my bag down and I just walked right back out and I was like, hey, I'll be right back. And I walked right back out. This is Cassidy talking. Because I just needed a second to kind of calm myself down so I wouldn't freak out in front of Stephan and not, So I was trying to just get myself in the mindset of, I have no idea what they're going to ask me. I have nothing to be scared about. Now, Hutchinson admits that on June 6, 2022, after her third interview, she reached out to Representative Cheney directly. Now, Hutchinson described scrolling through her contacts and texting the only person that she had not turned to yet for guidance. According to Hutchinson, Cheney responded almost immediately. Hutchinson goes on to explain that she sought assistance from Cheney to identify a new lawyer. Oh, and Cheney's going to help her with that. Yeah, we'll help you get a new lawyer. And that Cheney subsequently called with contact information for multiple lawyers, including Hutchinson's new lawyers at Alston and Bard. Incredible. This is the George Conway situation. Basically, same thing happening, right? They find these people who are lost and exploitable. So you have, in that case, E. Jean Carroll, this whacked out woman with a bizarre history who no one even believes. But the point is, Conway found her, introduced her to her lawyers, Roberta Kaplan, who filed the suit against Trump, clearly. Cheney connects with Hutchinson, hires her lawyers, get hers connected with lawyers, and then Hutchinson pays her back with the story. It's how it goes. And they all are orchestrating it against Trump. Now, we've covered this previously, this prior corrections in her errata sheet. And so this is just brimming with more. Of course, we're going to talk about Fannie, who also appears in this report. But let's see what Jim Jordan says with some reaction to not only Liz Cheney and the J6 committee, but all of the bias that exists inside the report. Jim Jordan, representative on the Judiciary Committee. Here is what he had to say.
You on this J6 committee to hand select people like Cheney and Kinzinger as the, quote, Republicans, right?
Yeah, we knew the way this thing was set up. We weren't going to get a fair shake. We weren't going to get the truth. We caught them in multiple. I mean, I caught them in multiple lies just about me. A text message I had forwarded, they said came from me when it wasn't. I forwarded, it was a lawyer, former inspector general for Don Rumsfeld, a lawyer at Patton Boggs had put together this short brief, and I forwarded that to the White House. Oh, Jim Jordan. I mean, they lied about all kinds of things. And of course, then Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, and I think where talked about the Secret Service, or President jumping across the Secret Service to grab this. It just didn't happen. Things that did not happen that they allowed someone to say, and then kept other interviews, other witness testimony from we the people. I think, again, just underscores how biased, how political, how wrong this whole J6 committee was.
And the fact that, I mean, they are going to run the entire presidential campaign on that day. Joe Biden is going to run almost entirely on January 6th. He doesn't have a lot of good news to tell people, so he's got to run on fear of Trump getting back into power. We know January 6th was the greatest thing they could have asked for. They only wish it was worse.
You saw that last week in the State of the Union address. First, he's 20 minutes late getting here. Then it takes him 10 minutes to walk down the aisle. The first thing he brings up is a foreign country, a state of our union. He brings up a foreign country. Then the next subject is January 6th, and the next subject is abortion. You know what they're going to run on, because they can't talk about all the crazy things they've done that have driven up the price of everything, that have unsecured our border where we basically have no border. They can't talk about those issues, so they're going to talk about January 6th, abortion, and Ukraine, for goodness sake.
For sure. And the motivation for this, I mean, for Liz Cheney to make a conscious effort to keep exculpatory evidence in a committee that we already knew was sham. I mean, you had nobody working for the other side in this committee. It was all on one side. They're concealing evidence. I mean, what do you do about this? I mean, is there anything that can be done?
I think that's a good point, Rob. This is the first committee that I've ever seen. I've been in Congress 17 years. First committee I've ever seen when there was no cross-examination element to it. No ability from the other side to cross. It was all one side. You never have that in a select committee or any of the standing committees. There's always both parties represented. But in this case, there wasn't. And they tried to mislead the American people. Now the truth is beginning to come out more and more.
All right. And we know that there is a lot more to this. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. The whole J6 facade is slowly crumbling around us. And more people are speaking out. More of the evidence is now coming out. We have guys like Capitol Hill Chief of Police, former Stephen Son, wrote a whole book about it. And we're identifying that Liz Cheney, as we all suspected, lied about stories, just fictionally created them. We have Clavicle Girl, who has some new version that conveniently she popped out after the third interview on the fourth try, gets her lawyered up, gets everything orchestrated, shoves it down the gullets of the rest of the people on the J6 committee, and then expects America to buy it. And many Americans did. And by the time this cover-up is exposed, the question is what Americans will hear the truth, what Americans will hear the correction, and who will just believe the lies. But we're going to be here continuing to cover this, and there's more to dig into on this report. So we're going to be doing that, my friends. Now, thank you for joining us. Thanks for checking out some of the links in the description below, including Watcher Lodge. We got free events over there on the calendar. Check those out and join us. And also come and join us for a morning live stream at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We'd love to see you there and back here on the next one.